The project that we did was called Cursed City Dark Tide. It was funded by the Arts Council England as a sandbox project. So it was very much a kind of experimental, have a go at trying to do a transmedia in the city of Portsmouth. And just to say, there is, if you want to, you can go and see all about it on the website. There's a number of threads to this, and one is that I was actually teaching this transmedia module to final year students, and I found it quite difficult to communicate the idea. It's quite an abstract idea, and subsequently I've decided it's not something to teach to undergraduates. It's something that's a bit more MA level, I think. It's very much a emergent practice. The language is still emerging, and there's been discussions over the last 2 days about how do we describe the person experiencing, what do we call them? And I've landed for the affected, which I quite like because there's a sort of a play on zombies there. I would say it's a threshold concept, and so it's really difficult to kind of communicate. And so not only am I talking to students about this, but I'm also working with creatives who are getting involved in the project, who also have not done a transmedia before, don't know what it is, and being asked, well, can you explain what this is within 5 minutes, which is quite difficult. But and eventually I came up with this shorthand, the city as escape room. And if you say that to someone, they kind of get the concept quite quickly. Everyone has, even if they haven't been to it, they have a concept of what an escape room is. And if you say city of escape room, so it's a whole city where you play games and puzzles and so on. So that was where the term came from, and it kind of then led into further sort of theoretical inquiry as I went on. I want to contrast what we did with this sort of more commercial idea of a city as escape room. Clued Up Games is a great business model, because they have all these sort of games that you can do, and they're all kind of on the phone, and you go around and find clues and answer puzzles, and people dress up according to the theme. They do Alice in Wonderland, and the one I did was Sherlock Holmes. Now, I did that Sherlock Holmes game in Portsmouth, where Conan Doyle wrote some of his early stories, and he has a significant, thing in the city. And the game didn't riff off that at all. And what I've realised is they've got these games, and they can literally drop them on any city in the world and just move them around, and bang, they've got a game. That's their business model. And I think this is where I started to kind of get that sense or started to delve into that idea of affect and transmedia storytelling. Although at that point in time I didn't really know where I was going. It wasn't until I read this book by Donna Hancox, I can never remember her name, Hancox. I've spelled it wrong. Anyway, so she talks about transmedia as a placemaking activity, and I'm not going to go too much into detail with her theories there, but this idea of being able to illuminate relationships between people, places and practices, that really resonated with what we had done with our project, in antithesis to the Clued Up, the kind of commercial Clued Up games, which didn't resonate in terms of place and relationships to place. So that's the basic comparison that sort of started making me think, well, what are we doing differently, and how are we doing it? And out of this came some ideas and some questions about is there a narrative theory of experiential storytelling, and what would it look like, and how would you frame it theoretically? I am very presumptuously going to argue that there isn't one out there. I haven't come across it. I may have just missed it, but I don't think there is. I come from a filmmaking background. I taught screenwriting and such, and there's a very distinct discipline, body of knowledge and all of that. But with transmedia and immersive, there isn't so much. Maybe there is in other disciplines, but not within my own. And so I wanted to know, how is meaning co-created in experiential storytelling? And that's one of the key shifts between linear and non-linear experiential storytelling. So the conceptual framing, I'm going to whiz through this because I'll never do it. How long have I got? I'm not doing too bad. Is these ideas of sympoiesis, which comes from Haraway, becoming with the city, the ecologies of belonging, which is where I found a lot of the theoretical underpinning for what I'm going to talk about now, and this idea of urban foraging as an example. And I'm going to come back to that later and illustrate it with an example. So the case study really sort of starts to join all of those things up through urban magic, which I would argue is a sort of marking of the city, and street art, and making links between that and street art, which is a marking of the city. And I'm going to unpack it through the lens of this ecologies of belonging if I don't run out of time. So the basic principle here is that this idea of a thickening of place which comes about through, and so this is the sort of theory related to urban foraging. So they talk about relating to the environment through food and through harvesting food and sharing food and communities and interactions. There is a thickening of place, and they talk about how it happens through two aspects: affective atmospheres and affect resonances. And this is sort of a key. I think this is a sort of a bit of an intermedial in between this, and it's the interaction of these two things that creates story, I would argue. So affective atmospheres are an assemblage of relational interactions, representations, meanings, task response activities, communication, production, distribution, unfolding of experience. For me, this is the role of the author in transmedia and immersive experiences, is to sprinkle affective atmospheres around for people to resonate with. And so the experience of the audience, if we take the urban landscape as a text that can be read, is an encounter with the urban that reveals story through a resonance between bodies, context and events. So there is a strong sense here of authoring and a strong sense of participation, and between them, the interaction between them is a form of co-creation that thickens place and results in what Haraway would call sympoiesis, a co-creation that emerges through collectively produced entanglements of relations, a knotting together of people, places and a meaning. And the more I've kind of spent time here, I've started to see this intermediality as an entanglement. Someone talked about in being entwined, and actually I think entwined has a particular kind of model in my mind, a particular visual model, whereas entanglement is much more complex. You think about how you get entangled in a fishing net, say. So the example of urban foraging, which is where I got a lot of these ideas from, I often find that when I can't find the answers within my own subject discipline, it's just a matter of rooting around, foraging, and finding which subject disciplines already fixed these problems. And I found it all in here. So it's a practice about going out and literally finding food growing in the city. And it's all about exchange. So it's all about community. It's all about creating meaning that resonates actively and thickens place. So the city, the place becomes more meaningful, more, it sort of defamiliarizes in a way. So that kind of leads to this idea of practices of belonging. And these are some of the, now we're starting to talk about some of the ideas that went into designing the project. All the affect, resonance and affective atmosphere stuff came later when I reflected on it and tried to work out what we'd done. So I would argue that urban magic, believe it or not, that's your choice, is a form of contagious magic which conjoins the urban and social through affective resonance. There's a kind of a sort of pretentious claim to some sort of magic realism there in terms of the story. And I would argue that urban street art functions in the same way as a sort of contagious magic. And it does so in order to reinvent and claim the urban space. And you could even think of street artists as shamanic placemakers who cast spells that thicken place through the creation of affective atmospheres. And I've come from a city where there's a very strong street art culture. It's very rootsy, and people really value it. And you know, a new piece goes up, people get excited, and they're also kind of like heralds of gentrification, typically. So now, one of the things that happens with street art as a symbolic practice, and this is Martha Cooper, who was photographing street art in New York back in the 80s, and it was really interesting seeing her talk about her role as a catcher, and she was saying how the street artists would be out in the yards all night. First thing they'd do in the morning when they came back would be to call the photographers and tell them which yard they'd painted, and then the photographers would know which station to go there, bang, catch and photograph. Now, of course, with the digital age and Instagram, that's become an absolute symbiotic or sympoetic relationship between catchers and photographers. And so we kind of played on that idea of, you know, perhaps this is the people doing the effective atmospheres, and these are the people who are resonating with it. But then other people can resonate with it through social media. And so, on a very simplistic level, you could think of urban shaman, urban foragers, street artists, catchers, co-creators. Both of these are co-creators. So, but this is where the authoring happens, perhaps, and this is where the experiencing happens. Although with transmedia, things can flow into each other and change. That's part of what you try and do. And so there were lots of examples in the project where we were riffing off of what was happening over this side and changing things here. So there was a feedback loop as well. So in the case study, Becoming Lisich, that's me, because we couldn't get any street artists to work with us. They're very solo, sort of hidden, sort of private people. And we did, just check the time, I've got 6 minutes. Brilliant. So, Cursed City Dark Tide took this book, which was a local author. It is a contemporary magic realist story set in the city. So it was really perfect. And we took a couple of characters, and we took the backstory from this lady here, Jane Downey. In the book, she's dead. She's been dead some 10 or more years, and it's sort of that murder drives the sort of story a little bit. We took the shape-shifting trickster, central character from the novel, and we reimagined that character as a street artist, but still a supernatural shapeshifter. And we also took the protagonist, Donna Danitza Kravich, a traveller musician with magic powers, who she doesn't really realise she's got magic powers at that point in time, but she's a fantastic fiddle player. So, if you want to know more about what we did, then come and talk to me. I've got lots of stories to tell. So I created all the street art. I'm not an artist, but I can do collage. I know how to use Photoshop, and so we kind of riffed off this idea of the fox and the tarot, and we kind of started to put these out, and they all have clues in them. So, you know, there are messages hidden in these, which, if you are playing the game, you can pick up ways to decode it in various kind of sites, interacting with some of our NPCs and other ways. And if people weren't getting it, we'd drop some clues. We'd help them out a bit, you know. So these went up over a period of time, so they didn't all go up at the same time. I think this was the first one, this was the Herald, and then they all went out at different times. This was my favourite, a missing set of tarot cards. Now, if you followed that particular thread, it took you to a pub where there was tarot readings and some of our actors. And actually, if you'd got these, you had to collect the tarot cards and put them together. And on the back were these patterns. If you put them together, you could look at this and then decode it. So there was a sort of whole thread attached to that particular thing. There's a model village in the city, okay, that people love it. And already street artists in the city had already been going in there and doing little street art. And so, and the book, the denouement of the book happens in the model village. So we paid an artist, we commissioned an artist to create a Danitza, Lisic, and there he is pasting up in the model village. And I think that's still there. It's probably looking a bit well worn out by now, but it's still there. So we created all of that. So it was kind of, again, extending the project out from where we found it. And one of the more surprising roles of the creative producer is to fill in when nobody else is available. So I took on the design and distribution of the street art, and I'm now internationally recognised as a street artist, with pieces up in Shoreditch, Lisbon, Melbourne, and now Japan and other places. Because one of the things about paste-up culture is that it's a bit like the old mail art thing. You can send them out to people and people will go around and put them up in their cities. And then still, I still do a bit of that. And it's a little bit of video here. So one of the things we would do is if I was out pasting up, I would get people to film it and we would release this on social media as found footage. And so they are nearly catching me. It's not me, actually. This is a real shape-shifting fox street artist. And actually there was a street art festival in the city recently, and I curated the paste-up wall, and people were coming on and saying, oh, where's your fox head? You know, why aren't you dressed as a fox? And so I had to go and get it and put it on. So in conclusion, place-based transmedia stories exist on a spectrum of perversive, ambient, situated experiences. This is Donna Hancock's, not Harcock's, Hancock's thing. So she talked about these three things, and I think that we actually did all of those things. And I think that actually looking at this and reflecting on this, I can see that as a place-making experience, that's absolutely what we did. And that was kind of quite exciting to realise that post the event. And obviously that drives future projects and future ideas. So we might want to think about sympoiesis as a narrative theory. Now, I'm not suggesting that people pay any attention to anything I've got to say, but I think this is, for me, this is quite useful. The idea to think that, you know, you've got authors and audience, whatever word we actually come up with in the end, the affected, maybe, that there is a sense that these people are foragers, the city or the building or the place as a canvas, that these people are responding to resonances, and these people have created these affective atmospheres, but also that there is a sense that you can build feedback into this, so it becomes live and lived, becomes a becoming experience rather than a dead one. It's all about entanglement. I think that that's kind of quite clear, that the people taking part are entangled in the story world, and that's really what you want them to be, because then they will start to embrace being the character that they want to be in that story world, and you can carry them through the different experiences. Ultimately, this kind of transmedia, if you think of it as a place-making transmedia, that's almost perfect, isn't it? Is about making the city together. Thank you for listening. That's my contact details. And there's my references, which people keep having references in their PowerPoints and then don't share their bibliography. So if you want that PowerPoint, if you want the bibliography, please just email me and I will happily share it. And that's me out. Thank you.